Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, after recently learning how Andy Ellis was recently named operating partner at YL Ventures and been inducted into IDG's CISO Hall of Fame, I felt compelled to find out more. Yes, about that incredibly cool accolade, but also how he's going to be supporting YL Ventures' portfolio of companies post-investment with product development, go-to-market strategies, customer engagements, and so much more. And regular listeners will know I've had a variety of guests from YL Ventures in the last 6 years we've been recording this podcast. So I'm genuinely looking forward to a good old-fashioned catch-up. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way stateside, where Andy Ellis is waiting to share his story with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil, thanks for having me. I'm Andy Ellis. I'm currently an operating partner at YL Ventures and an advisor to a couple of the startups in our portfolio, Orca, Vulcan, Grip. Before that, I was the CSO of Akamai Technologies, which I did for 21 years, starting as a security engineer, the only person in the security team, building a team of almost 100 people, 40% of whom were women, which is usually a pretty staggering statistic for our industry. I was recently inducted into the CSO Hall of Fame, which joins my interesting collection of awards. I have the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Wine Spectator Award of Excellence, the Spirit of Disneyland Award. I won the Sherman Oaks Galleria Spelling Bee, and now I have the CSO Hall of Fame.
Oh, the CISO Hall of Fame. That is incredibly cool. And a question I always like to ask my guests, especially when I've had such a fantastic career in technology, is try and learn a little bit more about their origin story. So can I ask, where did your love of technology come from? Can you remember what it was that put you on this path that you're on today?
So I think it's two things. The specifics of technology was I got as a holiday present a Commodore 64.
Oh, yes.
The Zero model, the one that was the darker brown before they went to the light brown. So for those of you old enough to remember, that was the very first Commodore 64 that had the VIC-20 before that, which I'd learned on in the classroom. And I just loved that, right? I'd get the computer magazines that would have the basic program in the back, and you'd have to type it in by hand. And that was just like, I loved learning how to do that. And we could use floppy disks instead of tapes. So it was a huge change. And so that sort of gave me the love of playing with computers. And I actually think that play is the start of the love of a tool. Is that you have to be able to play with the tool to really just push it to its limits. And then I've always just had a passion for understanding how systems work, whatever the system is, and how do I optimize it and make it better. Like, I'm the guy who backs into a parking spot so it'll be a little bit faster when I go to leave. And because it's safer to back in when I can see everything than when I'm in the car trying to back out and I can't see who's in that lane of traffic. So I combine those two things into wanting to take computers to make the world better.
Oh, man, you've brought back some memories there. I too remember copying code for hours out of a book or a magazine just to make something move on the screen. I also remember it taking me equally as long to correct the syntax errors afterwards.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, all right. You really had to learn how to find a syntax error when it's especially when it was on tape and you're like, oh my God, I have to load it up and then scroll through. But you learn some great skills that later show up when you're like, oh, here's how you debug something. Yeah. Because it was so costly to debug originally.
Absolutely. And here in 2021, then, what is it that brings you to the world of Israeli cybersecurity companies? Is there a story there?
So I started working with YL Ventures as an advisor. We have a CSO advisor pool of about 100 advisors, and I'd been doing that for about 4 years. And for me, a lot of it was helping develop the technologies that I wish existed, right? I'm always trying to move upstream. Like, I don't want to solve a problem after the barn burns down. I'd like to solve the problem before the barn ever gets built. In fact, before you have horses, you should already be designing your barn. And so getting to do that, to work with these amazing founders and help educate them about what problems I as a CISO had was where it started. And so I got to come out to Israel, and I'm a conservative Jew, so I'm always happy to travel to Israel. If I have to pick a country to go to, that's certainly going to be the one. So I would come out every year, and I'd get to meet with the founders and attend Cyber Week and hang out with the YL Ventures folks. And so when it was time to move on from Akamai, I reached out to Yoav, who's the partner founder, and said, "Hey, Yoav, I'd love to come and work within the portfolio. Is there a role for me?" And he was like, "Absolutely." And so my role is operating partner, which I like to joke is an executive without portfolio for the portfolio. So my job is to help make all of our companies successful, whatever that means. So for some of them, that's just executive development, right? They're new executives inside a startup that wants to become a big company. And I have, experience as an executive in a large, successful, publicly traded company.
And Israel has got such a great reputation at the moment. Of course, it's dubbed the startup nation, and there's a lot of excitement and a vibrant tech scene there. But why is it you think VC firms are investing in Israeli cybersecurity startups right now? Because there does seem to be a real trend around them.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to see that trend. Some of it is, I think there's more willingness to take the risks. Yeah. There's a confidence that you tend to see that is, sometimes warranted, sometimes not. And that's, you as a VC, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince and princess. But there's a lot of princes and princesses out there, and there's people who have practical experience. They were operational in the military. They have their degree. There's already such a dense ecosystem of startups and larger companies that people get experience working inside a company and then say, "Oh, I have an idea to go solve a problem." And so that confluence, and it's all happening, mostly in Tel Aviv. There's some startups down in Beersheba, but they're all so closely packed together. Like, you can go stay in a hotel, and within a mile walk, there's hundreds of companies. So unlike, Silicon Valley, where if you want to meet with people, you're driving for hours. The last time I was in Israel, I never got in a taxi cab except going to and from the airport. I literally walked everywhere from my hotel. Now, when I'm going back next month, probably I'm going to take a taxi cab, but that'll have more to do with the weather than the distance.
And what do you think is behind the trend of CISOs taking advisor investor roles as well? Because again, another trend we're seeing more and more of.
So I think it's probably driven by a couple of factors. One is the same one that drove me, which is that ability to sort of move upstream and affect change before the product shows up. I think one of it is, I think CISOs aren't quite considered C-level executives in most companies. When I speak across the CISO community, very few CISOs actually have a management relationship reporting to the CEO. That's different than like every other C-level executive. And often there isn't a path from being a CISO to being the CIO or to being a COO. So once you hit CISO, you're basically capped in your career. That you're not sitting at the executive table. You come in to report to them, to brief them, but then you leave the room when the decision gets made. And so CISOs, as they've hit this seniority point in their career, are looking for their next opportunity and saying, how do I have more influence and more effect? And so advising companies, working with startups is certainly a great way to do that. Invest in those companies, because if you want to take the step to the board, while people are looking for security experience on a board, they're also looking for that C-level executive experience. And so if you haven't been in the boardroom on a regular basis, I think it's a little harder to find those board positions.
It really is. And another hot topic at the moment inside businesses from all industries is improving organizational management and increasing diversity and diversity of thought. Is that something that you're tackling as well?
Absolutely. So that was a big goal for me at Akamai, was how do we do that? And it really is driven by a couple of things. I actually think diversity for its own sake should never be the goal. Mm-hmm. Like, that's a measurement you want to see. You want to see that you result in diversity. But if you're aiming for diversity in an organization, then you're probably going to miss out on the important thing, which is building an inclusive and welcoming environment. right? I once had a speaker who came in and he said, look, if you have two people, you have diversity, because everybody's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
But if you don't have inclusion, what you're going to start to have is a fight.
Yeah.
Right? You want to have a place that each person who comes in feels welcomed. And that's what lets you get to better representation, where people will look around and see people who are like them, who aren't all, oh, look, it's the company that only hires, white dudes in Silicon Valley. And you don't see yourself there. So my goal was to build an inclusive environment that met our people where they were, that gave them growth and development opportunities, that sought leadership as a way to invest in people rather than get more out of people. Now, as a result, we got more out of people. We were able to hire people who never would have come into a security team before. I would hazard over half of the people in my organization when I was at Akamai were not security professionals until they came to us. Because most security jobs aren't security jobs. When you think about the people who write a report on your latest threat research, there's some researchers who did the research, but writing a report on somebody else's research is a journalism job. I can hire journalists to do that job. I can hire librarians to be compliance managers. I can hire safety engineers to be program managers, because that's the same task. And what that does is that opens up career fields that have more diversity of body, but more importantly, have diversity of experience. You bring in somebody who has learned from an entirely different career field, ways of thinking that you will find helpful.
And just as we're talking here, a few moments ago, you did mention that you've been inducted in the IDG's CISO Hall of Fame. I've got to ask that you expand on that for me, because is it the most rock and roll you can get in technology? Because it just sounds incredibly cool. It
is really cool. Like, I got the notification. I was like, this is awesome. And I have this video that my team put together, Ivy coming out onto a stage and the song playing from will.i.am, Hall of Fame. In the background. And it's really cool. And, like all Hall of Fame, selected by the press. That's generally how a Hall of Fame often operates, as the voters are, members of the media. So I don't know what that process looks like. I was very honored. The other people who were selected are all amazing industry luminaries. I am so happy to be in that crowd of people. I couldn't imagine a better cohort. Although it's interesting that I was like, between when I was selected and when it was announced, right, I stopped being a CISO and now I'm an operating partner. So I think I'm the only member of the CISO Hall of Fame that is not currently a CISO.
Love that. And of course, now though, what makes you jump out of bed in the morning? What is it that excites you about supporting YL Ventures portfolio companies, post-investment with product development, go-to-market strategies, customer engagements, etc.? What is it that really excites you about them?
It's the fact that we get to help people do things that are going to, save their company. Security has this hard challenge that there's so many things that need to be done across so many systems that most teams do just the basics and move on. And so being able to work with a company like, Vulcan Cyber, who is helping companies, tackle vulnerability management and remediation, that's a hard challenge. Or Grip, who's helping companies identify all of the SaaS vendors that people are signing up for. Your employer doesn't even know half of the software as a service companies that people are using, and so we've got a company that said we'll solve that problem. Or Orca, who's basically provided a way to keep track of the security in your public cloud and make it better without having to do painful integrations. So when I look at those companies, I get out of bed and I'm like, this is so exciting to help any of these companies. And I've got 8 more. I could just go through this list here, but I'm not sure we've got time for that. And getting to talk to them, and everybody who I talk to wants to be on the phone with me. Yeah. Like, I'm not taking any meetings just because there has to be a meeting. This is always, if there's not value that I'm providing, the meeting isn't going to happen.
And from those 8 other clients, you said you've got a long list. I'm curious, are they all focused on one area or trending areas, or are they scattered right across the industry?
Oh, no, we scatter them across the industry. We have, Medigate, that is clinical IoT security. So only in medical practices that are on site. So not even the whole medical industry, but only places that are going to have medical devices. Ride Vision, that is providing, driver safety for motorcyclists. I mean, that's about as far from most security things as you could see, but it's about, motorcyclist safety. Caramba, that's, IoT security in the SDLC pipeline, originally focused on automotive, working into the OT space. So I think our goal is not to overfocus into one space, but to try to provide comprehensive solutions in any space that we're in so that we don't have to have competitive investments, because we don't invest in hundreds of companies. In any given year, it's 3 to 5 companies is all that we're going to make an investment in.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to love staying in contact with you and learning more about the journeys of all those clients that you've got there. But before I do let you go, a question I always like to ask my guests is, we started the episode talking about your origin story, but I'd also like to know a little bit more about the soundtrack to your career in tech as well. Is there a particular piece of music or a song that has accompanied you throughout your career, or just helps you get your head in the zone before going in a big meeting or keynote?
Well, I think that I'm going to share that with the audience, or just give a clip so that you don't get in trouble.
Be thy holy name.
But I think some Leonard Cohen.
Crucified in the human frame.
What a classy choice. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's, I love Leonard Cohen. First of all, he just has that gorgeous voice. I can just close my eyes wherever I am. And I think he talks a lot about the struggles of being religious and listening to what God says and to the stories and to how that, lands in reality. And, as a CISO, there's a piece that does resonate. We have this calling that we see and these things we're trying to do that we have to match up with business realities. And sometimes it's easy for you to look and say, wow, these people, I just don't imagine that I could even conceive of what they're doing. And it helps you think that, hey, maybe I just need to put myself into somebody else's shoes for a minute, because it's certainly not as bad as some other stuff. But Leonard Cohen, I could just listen to all day long.
Yeah, you and me both, with a nice glass of whiskey to boot as well.
Yeah.
I also believe you've got your own podcast coming out. When is that due to launch? Have you got anything in mind yet?
Yeah, hopefully we're going to launch it a little later this summer. It's going to be Cloud Security Reinvented. It's going to be sponsored by one of our companies. Orca is doing the production for that. And I'll be interviewing CSOs and cloud architects to help sort of pull out, what are the lessons they've learned over their career that other practitioners can learn from.
Excellent. Well, I'll be adding a link to that as soon as it launches on the blog post that will accompany this episode. But before I let you go, can you remind the listeners of where they can find YL Ventures online, learn more about all of your clients there, and maybe contact your team if they've got any questions or want to appear on your radar? What's the best way of doing that?
Absolutely. So YL Ventures, that's our Twitter handle. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us in Tel Aviv. If you're an Israeli founder or potential founder, certainly reach out to the team in Tel Aviv. We've got a great accelerator program, but that's where we're doing our investment. If you're looking for us to, invest in an A or a B round or somewhere else on the planet, probably not going to be a target for us. People can find me online as CSO Andy. That's generally on Twitter. You can also find me, on LinkedIn as well.
Well, I'm a big fan of YL Ventures. I've had several guests on from the company over the years. Over the 6 years I've been running this podcast. But more than anything, I've just loved hearing about your personal story today. And so thank you so much for sitting down and sharing that with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Neil. I really appreciate it.
What an incredibly cool guy. And also, it has to be said, a great podcasting and radio voice, hasn't he? I know he's going to have a hit on his hands when his show hits the airwaves in a few weeks. Love that. And also a big thank you to Andy for coming on and sharing his insights around VC firms investing in Israeli cybersecurity startups, why more CISOs are taking advisor investor roles, and what brings him to the Israeli cybersecurity company space. And finally, of course, the importance of organizational management and increasing diversity of thought. So if we've touched on anything that's close to your heart, if you've got a different opinion, or if you've got something you'd like to share with us, you've got a question, my inbox is always open to you. techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But if you do send a message or you connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter or anything, don't just hit the follow or connection request. send a quick message. Say you listen to the podcast. Let me give you a shout out on here. And we'll keep that conversation going. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.